Which alternative could we have to setting inline styles? Well, how about the following alternative? What if we could add a new CSS class to this div, which holds both the label and the input, and we would add this class dynamically only if the value entered is invalid. That could be something like a invalid class here. The name is totally up to you. So this invalid class should sometimes be added here on this div. And then in CSS, we could prepare the fitting styles. For example, here we could say, if the form control also has the invalid class, and therefore make sure there is no space between form control and this dot, which means they both have to be on the same element, then we could target our input and set the border color to red. And we could set the background to red, or actually now pick a much lighter version, like this very light rose color here. And if the form control, the div with the class form control, has a class of invalid, we can also target the label and set its color to red. So these here would be two CSS rules that should lead to the desired output. And all we need to do for these rules to have an effect is we need to add that invalid class dynamically. And here's how you can add classes dynamically. Let's get rid of these inline styles. We don't need them anymore. And instead, let's see how we can change this class dynamically. It's very, very easy. Since we need a dynamic value, we need curly braces. Because a string is always a string. It's a hard-coded string. So we need curly braces. And now what we feed in, of course, still can be a string of form control. But a string where we dynamically add more text in it, where we dynamically expand it or concatenate a value to have this string, whoops, invalid, instead of this string. So what we pass to class name on this div sometimes is a string that looks like this, and sometimes will be a string that looks like this, depending on what the user entered and depending on our isValid state. And for that, we can use a nice construct. We can use backticks here. Now, in case you're not familiar with this is a default JavaScript feature. It's called a template literal. This constructs a string, but we have backticks here, not single quotes, but backticks. It's a special character on your keyboard. And whatever you type between there will be treated as a regular string. So we can add form control here. But, and that's now the tricky thing, you can also inject a dynamic value into that string with a special syntax which looks like this: $, and then again a pair of curly braces opening and closing. This adds content into the string, and what you pass between these curly braces can be any JavaScript expression. So a lot like our curly braces inside of JSX, here now inside of the template literal. So here we could now check if isValid is not true, hence the exclamation mark at the beginning. And if that's the case, we insert invalid here into this long string. Otherwise, we enter nothing or simply an empty string in this case. So that simply will make sure that class name is either set to a string which has only form control blank nothing, or to a string which is form control blank invalid. So therefore now if we save this, if I submit this in an empty state, I get my error look here, my error style. But other than that, if I start typing, I go back to the non-error style because we dynamically add this invalid class. And of course, you can inject multiple things into that string, so you could repeat the same technique to add more dynamically added classes. And that's very powerful because now you're back to working with CSS files and with classes only. And you can dynamically add or remove classes with this simple syntax. And it will be React's job to actually add or remove the classes in the DOM. You do what you can do best in React. You specify a goal, you specify some alternative states, for example, that the goal sometimes is to have just form control and sometimes form control and invalid. And React will make sure that the DOM, the real DOM, is updated accordingly. This is React in action, and this is how you can add styles dynamically.